Right, we're live.
Welcome to this week's episode of the Contrarian Daily Podcast, episode 2. Absolute pleasure to have you here watching us. If you are watching us live, make sure you comment. Make sure that you get amongst it. We love to hear from you. Questions we'll try to answer, etc. But let's have a bit of fun with it. I'm here with my two incredibly good-looking co-hosts. We have Chris Jong and Jack Julius. How are you, boys?
Thank you, Andy. We're good, mate. How are you?
Very, very good. Not as good looking as you guys, but I'm going to try my very best.
At least you speak the truth, mate. At least you speak
the truth.
So.
Exactly. You're a harsh man, Chris. You're a harsh man. So, boys, a lot's been going on, and again, every week the circus continues to roll on. Although, I think this week there's been some interesting positive things happen. Yet, I get a little bit worried that we're going to get our hopes up. And then things get ripped out underneath us. So what I'm actually talking about is some of the border restrictions lifting. Vaccinated and unvaccinated being able to travel into Gold Coast and Queensland again as of 1 a.m. on Saturday morning, which gives me hope that things are going to head in a more positive direction. But again, look, we said this last year. What do you boys think?
Yeah, look. It's an interesting time. I think that the Novak stuff has been really interesting. But in terms of food shortages, that's the biggest concern for me at the moment. I really am very, very worried about that. How about you, Chris?
Yeah, likewise. As we were saying last week, it is going to be an issue for this year. And I think we're going to have a few wins, obviously, but we're definitely nowhere near the end of this fight, as far as I can tell. So, look, there's always reasons for optimism, but we just need to make sure we're not getting too optimistic and setting our expectations that we're going to, like, as soon as this one thing happens, we're going to be all good and nothing bad's going to happen again. We just need to know that, hey, we're going to have our wins, but we're by no means out of this yet. So
yeah, it's so true.
I think
so
the
true.
thing that really concerns me about the food shortages is the examples that we see in other countries. And particularly what I wanted to put the spotlight on this week was Venezuela, because not many people really have a very deep understanding of what's happened in Venezuela. But over there, it is a socialist hellhole. And they, power and water are sporadic. The most basic goods like, toilet paper are really in short supply.
This is why we have to hoard toilet paper.
Freedom of press does not exist, So, yeah, we've seen a bit of that, not to that extent. But so I think that being wary and being careful of food shortages is something that we should definitely do, because it's not a trivial thing. It's no small matter. And they said at the start of this, 2 weeks to slow the curve. And now they're going to say a few weeks of, food shortages. And if we got that, then we should be seriously concerned about this.
Yeah, 100%. 100%. It's going to be an interesting topic to talk about, and there's plenty going on. I actually had a shopping experience myself as well, which we'll probably get into throughout this podcast.
Oh, that's scary. I don't know what's on your shopping list, mate. But you're right. No, exactly. But you're right. I mean, it is definitely a worry, and it's it's happening in everywhere, isn't it? Queensland, Melbourne, everywhere at the moment. Toilet paper is nowhere to be seen. Meats and chicken, it's scarce. Where do you think this is coming from, Chris? I know you've been doing a lot of interesting research in different areas. What's your thought on the reasons why and where's it going?
Well, the reasons they're giving is because of the whole COVID situation in terms of people having to miss work and things like that. And that's obviously a part of it. They're manufacturing that whole thing. But there is a bigger picture in terms of breaking down the food supply and the food chain overall. There's a lot of things happening overseas in Europe and things like that where they're declaring like swine flu and bird flu, and then actually, eradicating a lot of the pigs and birds and healthy chickens and things like that over there now, like thousands and thousands of them.
This is happening now.
Issues. Yeah, happening now. That's exactly right. And
wow,
so they're going to say that the reason. Yeah, they're going to say the reasoning is, from the fact that people are off work, but there's a lot more going on behind the scenes. And so,
Andy, you talked this week to Chris, the Prime Mod, and he was saying something in that Instagram live about someone buying up massive amounts of stock and then destroying it. Was I hearing that right? Yeah,
that's right. So he's been in conversations with multiple farmers, and he has been talking directly to the farmers, which have been saying that they have plenty of stock. There is a lot of stock there ready to go. One of them specifically, though, had his stock destroyed. And so again, I mean, it's interesting what's taking place. And And I guess the bigger reasons for that, I don't know how deep we go because I know there's some.
But look, this is why I drew that comparison to Venezuela, because you don't want to be reliant on the government for something as basic as food and supplies. And if it does get to the point where we start to see our government say, hey, listen, guys, food shortages, we're just going to sort of hand out some rations. And that is the extreme end of things. But it's by no means out of the realm of possibility. I mean, nothing is out of the realm of possibility at this stage. So if we do start to see that sort of thing, then this is not a false equivalency that we're drawing.
No. One other thing I'll add as well is the fact that with all the inflation and prices going up, it's really affecting, the fertilizer and insecticides and things like that. So as those costs go up, farmers are finding it a lot more difficult to afford those things, and that means that everything else is going to get trashed. And we'll probably cover this, whether it's later in this podcast or another podcast, but there's a lot more going on behind the scenes with this. And a lot of it comes down to, there's that video from the World Economic Forum about the Great Reset and things like that. And one of the things they mentioned was the fact that meat or red meat would be a delicacy rather than a staple. And so that's sort of one little indicator of where things are at and where they're wanting it to go. And we'll cover this, I'm sure, a lot more down the track.
Do about his gains?
Well, I'll be the first one riding, I'll tell you that much. But also in saying that, you've got some of these big technocrats investing a lot into fake meat manufacturing, etc., which again, it all sort of stems back to the money, doesn't it? Smell the money, follow the money. But I think it'd be awesome to get our tonight's guest on board for this conversation, because she actually lives on a farm, and she's very, very knowledgeable on many of these topics. And it is none other than the amazing, the powerful Evelyn Ray. How you doing, Evelyn?
I'm good, but again, you got to stop doing these intros. I have a lot to live up to, and I will always fall short.
I was going to say the notorious Evelyn Ray. Now, how you been? Good?
Yeah, I've been laying low like the last sort of week after about the 108th death threat. I was like, I'm just gonna go back in my little cave or my own little world just for a bit while I let the fire sort of blast through.
Yeah. Has it always been like this? I mean, this is the state of the world right now, where you're talking about topics that really should be discussed and need to be discussed, and again, you're getting bombarded with death threats. I mean, has it always been this way, team, or is this just, again, a phenomenon in the last 2 years because of the pressure and the craziness that's taken place? Has it consumed people?
I think.
Well, definitely.
Oh, sorry.
Go ahead.
You go.
Go ahead. No, go ahead.
I'm not, I guess, new to death threats. I served in the police for 12 years, so I'm used to it. But before, it was, they hated me because of the badge that I wore. But now, being in this spectrum, they hate me because of my opinions and what I have to say. And to be honest, this one hurts a little more. Like, if I'm probably being a bit of a woman here, but I'm not quite used to this. I've only been doing this for a few years, so I'm not as leathered skin as I used to be when it used to be because of the job. But I think this sort of climate that we're in is like, we are ripe for like cult-like behavior and fear-driven cults. And I think that's what we're seeing. So people are kind of, I don't know, they're doing things that I guess a normal rational person would say is wrong and irrational. But to them, it's like pathological liars. They actually believe the lie that they're living in, and they'll fight it till the end. But, I think we've always lived with this many idiots. We've just never been tested until now.
Yeah, you're not wrong. I mean, it is getting pretty intense out there. That's for damn sure. And I think the more that this drags on, the crazier people seem to act. And it really looks like people just are not thinking through their thoughts, their emotions, and the behaviors right now.
Not at all. It really is a pressure cooker. Like, all this fear and all this stuff that they're going on, they're really putting a lot of pressure on people. And so, things like with Evelyn and other people who speak out and may have certain opinions, it's like a pressure release. So all that pent up, fear and I guess anger and everything gets pushed and directed, unfortunately, in areas that it's not really deserved. So
yeah, and I was going to say, Evelyn, you live on a farm. Do you have a few steers? We were just talking about the potential meat shortage that's going to plague us for some time to come. Do you have a few steers if times get tough?
Look, I think I'm right for the apocalypse, if I'm honest. I have over 200.
We're coming to your place.
Look, I don't disclose my address, and I'll tell you, if people find out, I have a very good shot. But no, honestly, the meat industry right now is fantastic for farmers, for people in my position. I'm sort of only new into this, I guess you could say. I'm not like a fourth generational farmer or anything, like, we're sort of starting out now, but there are a lot of farmers who are saying, finally, after decades and decades of getting nothing for our meat and working ourselves to the bone, we're finally seeing like meat prices go up. But yeah, like a steer these days, if you get like a 2-year-old steer and you sell it, you're looking at close to $3,000, whereas back in 10 years ago, you'd maybe get $300. So there's a massive increase and obviously a big demand for it. But look, I actually butchered and slaughtered our own steer. I think I was telling you about this, Andy, not long ago. And that's like in my freezer. I'm right for a year, the size of that thing. So I'm looking pretty good if the apocalypse hits. But poultry is another story. I have chickens, but I'm not sure if I want to eat them or I want to eat their eggs.
What's your thoughts on the food shortages at the moment, Evelyn?
Yeah, it's interesting. It's sort of there's no denying that shelves are more empty than they normally would be. I went to my local grocery store today, which is just an IGA because I obviously live in a country town, and everything was absolutely chock is full. Plenty of meat, plenty of toilet paper. Maybe it's a region, like an area thing. Maybe there's pockets and groups of people who are freaking out and going and stocking up on the dunny roll. I don't know. I think there's no denying that there are things going on with stock and with food, and you'd be pretty probably silly to think that it's impossible to happen, and you'd probably be pretty silly if you weren't at least considering preparing for that possibility. But I just think there's so many lies out there right now. It's so hard to sift through what's fact and what's fallacy.
Yeah, and I mean, it's been difficult for you over the last few weeks, but you've been doing this conservative political commentary for a little while. And, how have you found it so far? And why did you get into it in the first place? Because you've been a really powerful voice in Australia, and I think you have some big things to come personally. But how's it been so far for you?
Yeah, I sort of came out in the same-sex marriage debate back in 2017, sort of 18. And I went under the name of Girl Rising Above the Noise. So I didn't actually have my name on my face out there for a while because I was still employed by the police. So I wasn't allowed to put my name on things and be out there. Once I resigned from the police, and I was looking at doing that sort of towards the end of 2019, it officially came through in 2020, and I kind of went, finally, I can reveal myself. I think a lot of people probably assumed I was a 40-year-old obese man in my mum's basement. So, but when I sort of came out, yeah. I had so many people say that, and it used to grind me. Like, I bet you're not even a girl. And I was like, because I couldn't say anything. And then finally I was able to, and it felt so good. It was like, I'm free. But I've been doing it, for quite a while. I like to say I was a pre-COVID conservative. I think a lot of people have sort of come into this spectrum, I guess, through COVID, which is fantastic. I'm not one of those people who's like, we don't want you, we need everybody. But yeah, I would say I'm probably the oldest stock of what's, the online commentating sort of thing. But it has certainly, it's never really changed. There's deep, dark pockets on the web that don't like what I have to say and what conservatives and I guess more libertarian sort of right-sided political people have to say. But it's nice having more people sort of in the fight now through COVID.
And it's definitely like a dying art. Ben, you guys are scarce right now, and you were before for sure, because conservatism in Australia is, it's got its own niche, but it's really taking off now. I think the likes of Candace Owens in the US and Charlie Kirk and those guys who are basically taking the internet by storm are really helping with that. So do you watch those guys? Do you take any inspiration from those guys at all?
My favorite conservative that I follow really closely, and if I could be half the woman that this person is, I'd be happy, is Ali Beth Stuckey. So she has a program on The Blaze. She's a lovely Christian. Sorry?
Didn't she give you a shout out?
I don't think so. That would be like, I would like plaster that like on a wall somewhere. I'd look up to that and go, keep doing it, Evelyn. But I don't think so. But she, I really like her stuff. I can't think of many things other than theological things, like the end times things, but you know, actual stance on political things and life things. There's not many things that she said, I can't think of anything that I disagree with. So I really like her. I do like Candace Owens and all those things. I'm not sure I'm completely on board with all of Turning Point USA, if I'm honest. I think that they're modern conservative. I would say I'm more traditional conservative, but you know what? There are some fantastic people at Turning Point USA who are doing some amazing things, which should be applauded. But yeah, I am certainly, it's a rare thing to be like, I guess, traditionally conservative, like in society. A lot of people are economically conservative, you would say. But I would say I'm probably across the board conservative in how I view society and culture, as well as the economic sort of side of things.
And why do you think that is?
What would you say fundamentally, what would you say is your goal? If you had to like boil it down to something, what do you really stand for? What would that be?
Look, I think that the decline of the West, like in my opinion, is because we have retracted ourselves from how we should be living, and that is according to how Christ has told us we should live. And I know not everybody's going to like that. Not everybody is a Christian, but there is absolutely no denying that the Christian men and women are the ones who shaped the West, what I would call America, Europe, the UK, Australia. You just can't. It's history. It was built on the backbone of men who had God and then government underneath God. And I think that, unfortunately, through our cultural shifts, and I guess through, intermittent compromise over the years, we've tolerated a little bit more. And what we've done is we've basically like gotten an axe to the foundations of what made the West great, and we've chipped away at it, and it's kind of falling down now. And I would like to see the things that made the West great, that made us prosper, that made us thrive, come back. And that is having a respect for God, having the government under God, and having people respect other human beings as they would like to be respected themselves. So I'd really like to see, even if you're atheist, agnostic, Catholic, whatever, like just the acknowledgement that we've gotten here because of those foundations and those forefathers who did that. And I honestly, to put it simply, I just really want a place where I'd feel safe to raise kids in, somewhere where my kid can get on a bike and go down the end of the street without me needing to be there, and be friends with neighbors. And just like, I think we've lost our community feeling. Yeah,
you're not wrong. And I think that's one of the things I've noticed definitely over the last 2 years. It's a lack of people aligned with values and good solid value set. And I think you're right. That's why we're seeing so much fear. That's why we're seeing a breakdown of society. That's why we're seeing people worship the government the way they are, because they aren't worshipping anything else. And I think it's been really interesting to see. But what do you think that we will see a shift in people realigning with religion and with God because of what's taken place?
Oh, absolutely. I did the speech, I forget the date that it was. Was it, I don't know, sometime in December, I did a speech at the Freedom Rally. And I remember being really scared because everybody before me kind of had a very different approach. But I was like, it was my first public speaking event. And I tell you what, I was so nervous. But I just remember sitting under the tent waiting for my turn, going, I'm going to get booed off the stage. Well, you may as well end with a bang, Evelyn. Just go for it. So I kind of went on and went a little bit preachy and sort of said the reason why we're in a tyrannical state is because, Caesar, which is the government, is saying that they own the people when not. God owns the people. And because God owns us, because we are under him, we have these inherited values of freedom. He gives us that because we're made in the image of him. And anyway, I sort of went for it, and I was super nervous about the response, but so many people contacted me afterwards and were like, that's exactly what we wanted to hear. Thank you for doing that. And a local bookstore in Sydney sort of caught on to my speech and what I did. And then they set up this online thing where people could click and ask for a Bible if they wanted to. And this particular bookstore was not only distributed like 60 or 70 Bibles in Australia, they were sending Bibles to people overseas who had heard my speech and then were asking for it. So I think at the moment, there's nowhere else for people to turn. People are looking for answers. There's a void. And whenever there's a void, people need to fill it. It's like in our nature to need to fill voids. And people don't know what that void is. And I think I'm happy I might be giving them an opportunity to fill that void with something that's good for their life instead of filling that void with something that's bad, like alcohol and drugs and sleeping around and things that are actually destructive to people. I hope that I can at least give somebody that option and give them an alternative viewpoint. And I've just spent too many years hiding who I am, especially in the police. I was embarrassed to be a Christian, which I'm really ashamed of now. And, you know, I had somebody after my speech who I went through the police academy message me and say, I had no idea you were a Christian. I've just recently become a Christian. And I was so embarrassed. I was like, wow. Like I was only 18 when I was in the police academy, but I thought that's really bad because I thought I was a Christian then, and I hid it so much that they didn't even know. And so now I feel a real responsibility to not be like that anymore. And if people aren't interested, I'm okay. That's fine. Just scroll on, just unfollow. But I'm just not going to compromise anymore on sort of what I stand for. And I think the West has compromised too much on everything, which is why I guess we are here.
And that's what it means to be free, doesn't it? And what's your opinion on, and how do you feel about the response from the church over the last 2 years with everything that's taken place and their response now? Are you impressed or unimpressed?
I'm very unimpressed, Andy. I think, a weak church makes a weak nation. We're a weak nation right now, and it's because we have a weak church. Strong communities make a strong church, and strong church makes a strong nation. I think if you break the home, you break the nation. And churches is kind of what instills the home, the family. And that's sort of what we're seeing. I've been so incredibly disappointed with the corporate church. Of course, there are some amazing ministers in Australia who are standing up for what is right. But unfortunately, the mass church communities are turning on those ministers who are actually standing up against this tyranny, which is the most disappointing thing. I mean, I can't really get mad at people who aren't Christians and who don't really know any better and who are hating it, but people who allege that they're Christians and then turning on the things that would make you fundamentally a Christian, which is your God-given freedoms, I just can't understand. It's been really disheartening, sort of seeing, I guess, the church surrender to Caesar. A lot of people have come out with the most poorest of theological understandings of the role of the government. People say Romans 13. People say, you know, all these different books in the New Testament where Jesus talks about the role of the government, and it's just so inaccurate. You know, you render things to Caesar that belong to him, but you render things to God that belong to God and to Christ. And the church is something, the pulpit is something, and human beings and their liberties and their rights and their freedoms, that's not owned by the state. And I'm seeing churches basically invite the state into the pulpit and say, you dictate how we do this. It's been really disappointing. I actually left my membership of my church because of it. So my actual church has been pretty good, but we're part of like a denomination, and I was a member of that denomination of Australia. And I actually decided to leave. I couldn't in good conscience be a part of something like that. But what is encouraging is that there are ministers who are waking up to what's going on and who are standing up. And I think that we're kind of ripe for revival. I think we're ripe for a new era of shepherds and ministers. And, you know, maybe it's a good thing that we're letting all these bad ones kind of fall away with everything and show their true colors. But overall, generally speaking, apart from a few, I've been pretty disappointed with the church.
And Evelyn, I used to work for the Salvation Army, which is very, very Christian. And I actually used to be that guy who used to debate everyone and say that God is not real and this is why God is not real and yada, yada. And then over the last 6 months, I've started to engage again with my faith and go to church, which I never thought would happen. My old colleagues would laugh at me right now. But I think that the reason why I do that is because I am starting to believe that there is good and evil in the world, and that we're seeing that everywhere, and that there is an ultimate good and there is definitely evil. So do you see that playing out in the world, and how so?
Yeah, and I think this is, I get caught up in this as well. I sort of say left versus right all the time. And I say that because it's easier for people to understand. When I say left, I mean, Democrat. When I say left, I mean, in Australia, you would be Labor or Greenies or something, and in the right, the other sort of spectrum. But what it ultimately boils down to is good or evil. I mean, you're either on the right side of history or you're on the wrong side of history. And people can say that they're a Republican. People can say that they vote for Liberal in Australia or, one of the smaller parties, but it doesn't really mean they're on the right side of history, because they could be doing things in their life that is pretty evil. It's just a different label to the other side. So I do think it's massively a battle of good versus evil right now. There's just no denying it that there is something going on. I fully believe that we are nations under judgment. We've basically mocked God for such a long time. And if you look at Israel throughout the Old Testament in the Bible, they're constantly mocking God. They do something bad, and then he judges Israel by bringing in the Babylonians or, the Persians and people to kind of judge them. And it's almost like we're seeing that now. It's like we've allowed late-term abortions, like 9-month-old babies being born and then basically being murdered in the womb. We've allowed euthanasia in under the guise of good death and choice. We've allowed 12-year-olds to cut off their breasts or their penises in the name of tolerance and acceptance. Shoving hormones in 8-year-old kids who want to transition. We've been doing all these things that are so wicked and so bad for such a long time. It's like, do you really, is it this point where we are a nation under God's judgment? And, I'm pretty sure it was John Calvin who once said that if you want to judge a nation, you give them bad leaders. And I feel like that's kind of what's happening throughout the West. It's certainly good and evil, but the good thing is, stupidity can't sustain itself, and it will self-implode. And I do think, we know the ending of this. We know that good will triumph evil. And we just have to go through this great leveling where it sorts the wheat from the chaff with human beings as we're going through this leveling. But I know we're going to come out of it victorious. There's no denying it. The light will always shine in the darkness, but the darkness can't really snuff out the light. So
true. So true. Yeah, absolutely. And I think you nailed it before when you said that it's really showing people's true colors. And I think not only has that been the truth in the church, but it's been the truth in everywhere, with your friends, with your family, in society in general. I think the pressure and the push that's taken place over the last 2 years has really shone a light on people's weaknesses, on people's, again, true colors, whether they sway towards good or evil. And I think weakness, unfortunately, has been the main thing that's shown up for a lot of people. Hence why we're continuously giving in and letting these things take place. What's your thoughts on that?
Yeah, definitely. I think that these things draw out like a splinter. It's like putting cream on your arm and bringing out the splinter. It's sort of bringing out people's true natures. And, you'll know them by their fruits. And a lot of people say, you shouldn't judge people. You shouldn't do this. It's like, well, how do we know what's good? How do we know what's evil? It says it straight in front of us. You'll know them by the fruit that they bear. And it's like, well, how do you know? You examine the fruit. Is the fruit rotten or is the fruit good? And you've got to examine it to know it. And I think right now we're sort of examining people's fruits. We're sort of examining these weaknesses that you mentioned and things. And that's what we're seeing. I think that we can't hide these things under the idea that we have to be kind. We can't hide these things under the idea that we have to be tolerant. It's like that time is over. The time for being mediocre is just finished, and I've said this before, Satan owns the fence. You can't sit on the fence anymore. You got to pick a side. and the middle isn't one of them. And I think you've got to stand for good or you've got to stand for evil. And yeah, I think it's exposing people's weaknesses, people's strengths, and it's only going to continue to happen as we continue down this what feels like never-ending story.
Yeah. On the topic of weaknesses, our Australian government has made an absolute clowns of themselves once again with the Novak Djokovic situation. Being a former police officer yourself, do you think that there's sort of nefarious activity going on there?
I think he'd be pretty stupid if he did, to be honest, because I know from my experience that our quarantine in Australia, like pre-COVID quarantine, I'm talking legitimate quarantine, is one of the harshest and strictest in the world. I did a lot of work with the airports when I was in like organized crime and importations and things. It's really difficult for people to do it. And all the documentation that you have to bring in is like gone through very thoroughly. So he's either got a really bad team that don't know their stuff and put him in a bad situation, or this is just typical fear porn that's being put out there because they want the public to hate Djokovic. I don't know. I actually don't know where I feel. To be honest, I don't really care. And I think that's the point of it. I mean, the fact that he has to jump through these hoops to compete when he's not even this is the thing, he's not even sick. And that's the stupid part. We're doing all these things for people who aren't sick. And that's so whether he's made it fraudulently or whether he hasn't, I personally don't care. What I care about is the fact that as a country, we've made another spectacle of ourselves, of embarrassment on the world stage.
For sure.
And
bad though, because at the same time, it's kind of good that we look so stupid on the world stage, because as bad as that sounds, like if they're all looking at us now being like, okay, Australia is that country where our biggest superstars are going to go and get imprisoned for a week.
Yeah.
Then, it could kind of help our cause, that people are going to be looking at us going, what the hell? And then, maybe our politicians get kicked out of office.
Maybe there's some secret army forming somewhere in Antarctica that's going to come and rescue all of us from all these tyrants and all these draconian Gestapo. I don't know, but it is a double-edged sword. It's a bad thing, and you're right, it's a good thing. It's raising awareness on the world stage to show people what we're kind of going through here down under. But that whole Djokovic thing from beginning to end was just stupid. It's just ridiculous.
Absolutely.
And doesn't surprise me.
No, not at all. And it seems to just continue, which again makes me think, is this smoke and mirrors for a lot of the other things that are constantly taking place? As we've seen constantly over the last 2 years, they throw a shiny object here and pass this legislation here. But what we do know is while all this has been taking place, they have started to roll out the jab for kids and a few other things happening in the background. What's your take on that and what's been rolled out at the moment?
I think we all saw this happening over a year ago when the vaccines first came out. That was their ultimate goal. It was never enough for them. The goalposts continually changed. It went from 70% to 80% to 90% to 95% to then doing 11 to 18-year-olds. And it was just going to happen. I fully think that the next thing that's going to happen is it's going to be part of the immunization schedule for children, for toddlers. If you want to, and the thing is, this has been here in Australia since the 70s. And people, I'm not that surprised by it because, all of the other vaccinations are basically mandatory for children if they want to go to certain schools, if they want to go to daycare. And if you choose not to get your child vaccinated for all the other ones, you don't get Centrelink, you don't get welfare, you don't get family benefits. It's all taken from you. So the framework, the way that Australia has been set up for this very thing. So we shouldn't be surprised that they're coming after our kids, because the mandatory vaccination with children has been around, as I said, since the 70s, since the 80s. And so I think that this is going to just translate into that schedule. And I think that kids might need to have it as young as 4 going into school. I think that's not a far stretch to think that that's possible, and that they're considering it, or they haven't already thought about it. And these are just incremental steps to get them to that point. But it's pretty obvious they want every man and dog vaccinated. Literally, like they actually are talking about vaccinations for animals now for COVID. Yeah. So I mean,
it just doesn't stop.
No, so it's. I mean, like, it's one thing as an adult to make informed consent for yourself. As an adult in Australia, I would argue that we haven't been given the opportunity to make that informed consent. A lot of it's been bullying, a lot of it's been coercion, a lot of it's been basically you've got a gun to your head and they're like, you can make a choice. And it's like, you can choose. It's like, but you've got a gun to my head. I got to feed my family. So I would argue that adults in Australia haven't even been given that opportunity. But what makes it worse is now parents are in a position where they have to make these choices for someone who's vulnerable, who's under their guardianship, who's under their care. And with that responsibility, I just would love to urge parents to just take that into far more consideration than you even did for yourself. And, you know, it's a very scary precedent to set, especially moving forward, because who knows what else they're going to come up with, how many booster shots and the effects. We have no idea of the long-term effects. But yeah, I worry for the children. I mean, we're all adults. I worry for the adults, of course, but the children are basically not given a choice. I think they want this because they're putting especially that bracket of 11-year-olds to maybe 18-year-olds in a position where they're old enough like that they will blame their mum and dad if their life is crap. So children are going to go, Mum, I can't play tennis anymore. I can't do ballet. I can't play soccer. I can't go swimming. I can't go to the movies with my friends because I'm not vaccinated, Mum and Dad. How dare you? And they're going to turn on their own parents. And that's what they want. They're pitting parents against children. And they're also lowering the age of consent so that children can make these decisions without their parents. It's just messy. And our poor children are the ones who are going to suffer more than anyone else. So I really worry about it, to be honest, for the future.
Yeah, and I don't mean to, get my tinfoil hat on too much here, Evelyn, but why do you think it's happening? Because we've all got our theories, and if you do the research, then it's extremely alarming. And there's no doubt that the vaccine cartel is real, and they're making a lot more money than me. Why do you think it's happening?
I think money talks. Money's a language of itself, and I think if you follow the money trail, it gives you a pretty good indication of who's pulling the strings, what's at stake, why it's happening. Money is like the root of all evil, pretty much, and it's there's no doubt that the Australian government has purchased an amount, and that if they don't administer or use that amount, that's basically putting money in the toilet, billions of dollars in the toilet. They've got a lot at stake. But if you look at the companies who are in charge and getting all of this money, and you look at the root of the people who are running these companies, what they stand for, it gives a pretty good idea what they're trying to achieve. There's a lot of theory out there about, things that the vaccine could be doing. I don't believe it's a mark of the beast. I don't fall within that sort of eschatology. I'm post-mill, so I don't think that it's that. I don't really know what I believe to be the truth, but I'm very open to a lot of the other theories out there about the purpose of it and what they're trying to achieve through it. But I guess to put simply, follow the money. Who owns the money? Who's getting the money? What do those families stand for? What do these groups stand for, these companies? And it's pretty clear what they want.
Just on that, I found the article, or one of the articles about giving the dog a jab. So you were not joking about that.
No,
it's a real thing. It's very unfortunate.
Leave our dogs alone.
Capitalism right here.
Not the beagles. Oh my goodness.
Even the cute ones.
Yeah.
It's so funny. Everybody got so upset about Fauci with the beagles, and I got upset. Like, I love animals. Like, we in Genesis, we're told to care for the animals. Like, you'd have to be a sociopath or a psychopath to not care for the animals. But it was really interesting how people were so outraged at the experimentation on the beagles. And I'm like, what about the human beings? Like, what do we value more as a society? And I think it's just a reflection of our culture. We've replaced animals we've replaced children with animals, and I guess people, like I said, that void, people are filling voids in their life with pets and millions of cats and dogs. And as humanity sort of slips into its little, I guess, depraved sort of thing, animals do seem nicer. So I get it, but I found it interesting. People were so upset about the beagles. What about the children who are also getting experimented on?
If it was cats anyway.
True, cats are jerks. I'm there.
He said it. He went there. So what's your thoughts on the current lock-ins taking place in Northern Territory? I mean, when I heard about the lock-ins of the unvaxxed, it was pretty alarming to think that they could get away with that. And do you think it's going to transition to the other states, specifically metropolitan?
I think that Northern Territory is unique because of the climate. They do have like a large Indigenous population. They do have remote communities, and they have somewhat, like, from the beginning of time, been very removed from mainstream news. They're almost like a forgotten about state where there's just crocodiles and desert and you don't think too much about it. So it's policed very differently to a lot of other states. So I'm not sure what's happening there will go into the other states, because if you look at, New South Wales, Queensland, Victoria, there is a large group of people who probably wouldn't tolerate that. Whereas I don't know if Northern Territory have the momentum behind them as much, so the government can push it a little bit more, and they can throw the Indigenous card in there to get sympathy from other people. Like, oh, we're doing it to protect them. Very condescending of them, but I'm not sure. It's not out of reach. It is definitely possible, but I was really disgusted that one of the essential reasons to leave their home. That wasn't an essential reason to leave your home was work. They literally have taken livelihood away from unvaccinated people. And another thing was exercise. What's one of the biggest risk factors to COVID? Being fat. And it's like, you can't exercise. So it's obviously not about health. Nobody cares about health. I don't know if it will come here. I don't know if it will to that sort of extreme. But I certainly hope things change up in Northern Territory for them soon. It's just not sustainable. And I think it's a really scary place for people up there to be in.
Yeah, and Evelyn, you mentioned Dr. Fauci before, and you're a great writer. Have you been reading, and have you read The Real Dr. Fauci by Bobby Kennedy?
I haven't, no. I have so many books that I have half read, and so I'm like, I just need to get through them.
Well.
Yeah, there's just I'm like, wow, this is the best book. I'm never going to put this down. And then I read 3 chapters, and then someone's like, oh, have you read this book? I'm like, no. And then I get the other one, and then I get piles and piles of books. So I haven't read it, but I'm guessing you have, or it's good.
Yeah, it's good. It's good. I'm also reading about 6 books at the moment, but I just want to give a few stats now that we're talking about lockdowns, because this book is absolutely unbelievable. And it's only in the first chapter, these stats, right? So the average age of death in the UK was 82. And then from a study in the Associated Press, 10,000 children per month are dying from virus-linked hunger from global lockdowns. 500,000 children per month are experiencing wasting and stunting due to malnutrition, which is a lot, like, they're not getting as tall or as wide, so they're shorter and thinner. From the year 2000, this is not off that now. From the year 2000 to the year 2015, global poverty rates halved, and this was pre-COVID. And now the lockdowns have thrown us right back into this absolute state of chaos. And then before COVID, we had 92% of the world who had access to clean drinking water. And now that these lockdowns have happened, they're trying to tell us that it's for our health. But sub-Saharan African countries and Asian countries are having children dying in the tens of thousands by the month. So what do you think about that? I'm sure you're not happy about it.
No, I think you'd have to be a psychopath to be happy with something like that. And this is the thing. I think you mentioned this at the beginning, Andy. These are conversations that need to be had, but we're not allowed to have them. And I said this quote a long time ago before COVID, and this is so relevant to now, and that is, It's the absence of objectivity and debate that is the language of the oppressor. And we're not allowed to objectively talk about these stats. We're not allowed to objectively debate them and discuss them and at least put them out there for us to sort of have a conversation about. And that's the language of the oppressor. That's who the real oppressor is. It's usually the people with the biggest stick who are yelling the most that are probably the worst human beings. And I think that's a lot of what we're experiencing. And these are things that have to be highlighted, that we need to read about and look at. But sadly, the censorship and the overlords and that's the thing, like, if they really cared about our health, why don't these stats matter to them? They really cared about our children. Why don't these stats matter to them? It's really sad, just how far we're regressing. We're in 2021, but we're just going backwards. I thought if you look at the movies, every sci-fi movie, Back to the Future, all these other ones, and they predict what the future is going to look like. It's flying cars, it's all these great things. And it's like, what have we actually achieved? We're locked in our homes. We got kids dying. We got 5-year-olds calling up the suicide hotline in Victoria. We've got
no steak.
That's right. No steak or wine.
Worse and worse, exactly.
Priorities, mate.
But you're right. I mean, it's so freaking true, and I mean that's the scary thought. But the future, what does it hold? I mean, this is what everyone's wondering. Is it going to improve? Is it not going to improve? What's your predictions for this year? We've just started a fresh year. How are you feeling, and what are your predictions?
I don't want to be a pessimist, and I'm trying not to be a glass half empty, but if I'm a realist, I like to cut the fat off the meat, right? So if I'm just giving you the meaty answer, I think this year is going to be harder than last year, in my personal opinion. I think it's going to be different, but I think it's going to be harder because we're going to start seeing the ripple effect of the consequences from the last 2 years. I think we will probably see a lot of mental health decline. I think our economy is going to massively decline. I think our children, we're going to start seeing some of the things that they're suffering from. A lot of underlying health issues that have been pushed to the side, that have been forgotten about. I think they're going to start coming through. Women weren't allowed breast screening stuff during the pandemic because they said, priority of COVID. So I think we're going to see a lot of health things coming through. I know for sure, I've got I worked in the child abuse squad and sex crimes of Australia as a detective. And I know a few girls that I worked with who were there said the online pedophilia of the last 2 years is like 200% increased. So I think we're going to see a lot of repercussions of that because a lot of things have gone online. But through this, if I can be positive, what I do think is going to come out of this year is a new era of people who are unapologetic in where they stand, and a new era of people who have had enough, and who, one of the most dangerous people is somebody who has nothing to lose. And I think a lot of people are at that stage where they have nothing to lose, so they're more willing to push the boundaries and push back a bit more. We'll see a bit of that. And I guess my advice for those of us who know what's going on and like what should we do, like, because all these bad things are happening, is when we look outside of our computer screens or in the computer screen at things going on, when we look outside of our windows of our house and the world around us is kind of plummeting off a cliff, I think what we have to do is look in the home. We need to make sure the things that are in our four walls are protected. Our kids, our marriages, our relationships with family, our relationships with friends, our relationship with God. Those things need to be protected. And once we fix our homes and what's in our homes, that's when we can build these stronger communities. We can start going out and building stronger communities. I think that, we're ripe for a revival. The West is ripe for this. And that's something good, I think, that will come out in this next year. A lot of people who are going to go down that path. And, I lost a lot of family and a lot of friends, especially recently. I had a really hard week last week because I'm unvaccinated. I can't see my kids in my family. It's been really difficult, but what that's made me want to do more than anything is cling to people who are like-minded to me, invest time in people who love me for who I am and not my vaccination status. And I'm looking forward to building stronger connections with people who yeah, I guess are on the same journey as me. So it'll be a hard year, but it'll be a good year at the same time, I think.
Yeah, sound advice, sound advice. Well, we are honoured to connect with you, and you're doing such an amazing job. We all love watching what you do, and again, it's been so good to chat. So, Evelyn Ray, thank you very much. Make sure you save a nice, comfy spot on your farm for us when the apocalypse takes place, because we will be there.
Bring the skills. Like, what can you offer me? And I might grant asylum.
You're going to teach me to hunt. We're going hunting. Game on.
Yeah.
Right,
thanks so much
Evelyn,
for having me on. I really appreciate it. See you guys.
Appreciate it.
Thank you, Evelyn. Take care.
Evelyn Rae, what an absolute beast. I love everything she does. And again, the message is strong right now, but you got to give it to her. She puts herself on the line every single day, and she speaks her truth unapologetically. And right now, with all the fakeness and BS in the world, to me, I find it super refreshing. I don't know about you guys.
Yeah, I actually really enjoy watching her stuff, and particularly when she's very controversial as well. Because I'm a sucker for that online. I love a debate. I love seeing the little Twitter wars.
Absolutely.
What do you reckon?
Yeah, no, I agree. And I think it's good when she was saying people are going to be a lot more unapologetic. And I think that's what we need a lot more of, that attitude, because I think for so long, we apologize for our own thoughts and beliefs. And as Evelyn was saying as well just beforehand, we're compromising, or we've compromised ourselves into a tiny little corner. And yeah, look, it is time to be unapologetic,
Self-censorship is real.
Yeah, it's real
really
bad. It's real bad.
Somebody that doesn't really particularly self-censor so much. So you've got to respect it. And then, people are going to get angry, but people are always going to get angry no matter what you do, no matter what position you hold. There's going to be people who you're going to piss off, and there's going to be people who won't want to know from you. But you've got to be true to yourself.
He's talking from experience. Yeah. People just hate him from looking at him.
I mean, like one friend, maybe half a friend.
Yeah, it's so true. It's so true, boys. But I think the biggest issue there is so many people don't know who they are, So I think the first step, if you're watching this and you haven't had the courage to speak your truth yet, you've really got to figure out where do your values align and what do you stand for? What world do you want to live in? And what world are you going to create over the next 12, 24 months? Because the next 12, 24 months are going to be crucial for everyone in their own individual worlds, of course. But as a collective, we all have to think about where we are going to impact and where we're going to contribute and what sort of game we're going to play. And again, if we align with similar values and we have good intentions and good in our hearts, then we're going to be able to do something super positive.
Yeah, 100%. And just one more thing too that Evelyn was saying about clinging to people who have the same beliefs. We covered this in another video that we did earlier, but it's really important that we state our beliefs, because a lot of the time when you're just meeting strangers or you're out and about in elevators or shops or whatever, people don't know where you stand. And so one thing that I think we all need to start doing is just stating our beliefs and our position in a really non-judgmental and non-confrontational way. Just by sort of making a little half joke about, oh man, these masks are ridiculous or whatever else it is, something like that. And then by you stating your position, they'll get to know where you're at, and then if they feel the same, they'll probably have the courage to stand up and speak and say, oh yeah, I think that's ridiculous too. And if they don't, then they're not necessarily with the same aligned with the values and the beliefs, and then therefore they're not someone you want to really cling to or solidify with.
And there's a lot of it going on as well. I mean, I walked into my office the other day at work, and I started talking to some of the guys that I don't really talk to that often. And they were reading the same books as me. They were doing the same research as me. However, they would never put it on social media or anything because obviously it's, social suicide these days. But they were reading the same stuff as me. They'd done the same research. We had really, really robust backs and forths about it. And people are really, really awake to this stuff.
Yeah,
and I was really shocked by it because I didn't expect it. But the Great Awakening is also real. And if this thing goes the other way, we could experience some seriously positive things out of what's been largely non-positive.
Yeah, big time.
I agree. And that's what I will be putting my money on. I'm going to be the front runner in that one. I'm going to stay optimistic, stay positive, and we'll do absolutely everything we can to make sure that happens. But lads, again, thank you for joining me this week for another episode of Daily Contrarian. For all our contrarians out there, make sure you subscribe, make sure you like, make sure you comment. If you're watching this on socials, comment, share, get the word out there. This is a huge passion project for us where we're able to speak our truth and hopefully make a difference, whatever that looks like. So, lads, it's been an honor. Thanks again.
Thank you.
Likewise. Thanks. See ya.
care, mate.